It was a sunny afternoon in Fort Collins, Colorado. The park pulsed with life, children's laughter echoing from the swings, joggers weaving along winding trails, and families lounging under the generous shade of ancient oak trees. In the midst of this tranquil, familiar rhythm sat Camille, a poised, respected black attorney, alone on a bench near the pond, a thick hardcover book open across her lap. She had carved out this rare moment for herself, a brief escape from courtrooms and case files, to simply breathe and read. But the peace was shattered in an instant. The sudden screech of tires sliced through the air, making heads turn. A police cruiser pulled up to the curb with abrupt urgency. Two officers stepped out, expressions tight, movements sharp, their eyes scanning the landscape until they locked onto Camille, the only solitary black woman in sight. "Ma'am, can we speak with you for a moment?" one called, his voice laced with an edge that was more command than request. Camille looked up slowly, her brow furrowing ever so slightly. "Of course," she said calmly, marking her page and closing the book. But she could already feel the tension creeping in, a weight settling over her chest. The second officer stepped forward. "We got a call about suspicious activity in the area. Mind telling us what you're doing here?" he said, clipped and cold. "Suspicious activity?" Camille repeated, genuinely puzzled. "I'm just sitting here reading." She lifted the book slightly, as though its presence alone should end the conversation. But it didn't. Their eyes remained fixed on her, judgmental and unmoved. "ID, please," the first officer demanded. Her pulse quickened. "I'm sorry, but may I ask what the reason is for this?" she said, voice still steady. "It's routine," the second officer snapped, though the bite in his tone betrayed that it was anything but. A small crowd began to gather nearby, curious eyes, uneasy whispers. Camille let out a soft sigh and reached into her bag, pulling out her wallet and offering her driver's license. The officer took it and read her name aloud with a mocking tilt to his voice. "Camille Johnson. What's your business here, Miss Johnson?" "I live here," she said, forcing each word out carefully. "I came to enjoy the park. Is that a problem?" But instead of walking away, they pressed further. "Do you always carry a book like that?" one sneered. "Are you alone here, or are you waiting for someone?" the other added, one hand resting ominously near his belt. Camille had faced hostility before, in courtrooms filled with power plays. But this was different. This was personal. Yet she refused to shrink. "I'm not answering any more questions unless you tell me what I'm being accused of," she said firmly. The officer moved toward her. "Don't get smart with us," he growled, and then without warning his hand was on her arm. "You're resisting," he barked, though Camille hadn't moved a muscle. "What are you doing?" she exclaimed. Metal cuffs snapped around her wrists. The crowd gasped. Someone hit record on their phone. And in that moment, Camille Johnson, accomplished, composed, law-abiding, was paraded away like a criminal. But as the cruiser door slammed shut, one thing burned bright in her heart. This was not the end. It was the beginning. Inside the back seat of the police cruiser, Camille Johnson sat shackled by cold steel cuffs, her wrists already red and aching. The same woman who once stood tall in courtrooms, defending others from injustice, now found herself in the suffocating grip of it. The silence in the car was deafening. No apologies, no explanations, just the low crackle of the police radio and the soft hum of tires on asphalt. Outside the window, the world moved on, unaware that a profound violation had just occurred in broad daylight. Camille's reflection merged with the blur of passing trees, a surreal reminder that she was now on the other side of the system she had dedicated her life to navigating. At the station, things went from bad to worse. The fluorescent lights buzzed harshly overhead as the officers processed her like a criminal. Her fingerprints were taken. Her photograph snapped. Each step of the booking process felt like a deliberate attempt to strip away her dignity, her identity, her power. "Enjoy your stay," one officer sneered as he shut the heavy cell door behind her. Camille sat down slowly on the cold concrete bench inside the holding cell, her arms still sore, her breath shallow. She tried to replay the moment again, as if she'd missed something, some sign, some trigger, but there was none. She had simply been there, existing, while black. Hours passed before anyone returned. The clang of keys echoed as a young officer approached her cell with a clipboard. "Miss Johnson," he said flatly, not even meeting her eyes, You've been charged with resisting arrest and obstructing a peace officer." Camille stood up, rage rising in her chest. "On what grounds?" she demanded, her voice sharper than she intended, but the officer merely shrugged. "You can discuss that in court," he replied, and walked away. Left alone again, Camille closed her eyes and forced herself to focus, not on the humiliation or fear, but on strategy. The charges were flimsy, fabricated. She knew it, but she also knew that truth wasn't always enough in the justice system, especially when it came to people who looked like her. And this wasn't just about winning her own freedom, it was about drawing a line, exposing the systemic bias that had targeted her in the first place. When she was finally released on bail later that evening, the cool night air outside the station felt almost cruel against her skin. Standing there was Marissa, her close friend and colleague, whose face was etched with both relief and fury. "Camille!" she called out, rushing to her. "Are you okay?" Camille nodded stiffly. "I'm fine," she whispered, though the tremor in her hands betrayed the lie. As they drove away in silence, the weight of the day sat heavy between them. But Camille finally spoke, her voice quiet, but laced with fire. "I'm not letting this slide, Marissa. Not this time." And in that moment, something shifted. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a woman on a mission, and she would make sure the world knew what happened when justice failed the wrong woman. That night, long after the police station faded in the rearview mirror and the cool air of Fort Collins whispered across her skin, Camille Johnson sat hunched over her kitchen table, no longer the humiliated woman in handcuffs, but the attorney, the strategist, the fighter. The soft glow of a desk lamp illuminated scattered legal pads, stacks of case law, and her laptop blinking open to a fresh document. Her hands still trembled, not from fear, but from something hotter, deeper, righteous fury. She had spent years defending others, pushing back against injustice inside courtrooms that too often tilted against the very people they claimed to protect. But now it was her name on the arrest sheet. Her wrists that had been bruised, her dignity dragged into the dirt. And that meant she wasn't just building a case, she was building a reckoning. "I have the tools," she muttered under her breath, scribbling notes with surgical precision. "The knowledge, the voice, and now I have the motive." Her phone buzzed nonstop, friends checking in, colleagues offering cautious support, strangers sending messages of solidarity after the arrest video went viral. But Camille ignored most of it. Her focus narrowed into a sharp, unyielding point: justice. Not just for herself, but for every person who had been stopped, questioned, dismissed, or brutalized, simply for existing while black. The next morning, she made it official. Camille filed notice of intent to sue the officers and the department for violating her civil rights. The suit wasn't just about the wrongful arrest, it was about the message it sent. That even someone as accomplished and educated as her could be treated like a criminal for reading in the park. And if it could happen to her, it could happen to anyone. Some at her law firm were uneasy. "Camille, are you sure this is the right move?" one partner asked, voice heavy with caution. "You're making this very public." Camille didn't flinch. "Exactly," she said. "It needs to be public." In the days that followed, the community rallied. The video of her arrest spread like wildfire, shared, dissected, debated. News outlets reached out, activists voiced support, strangers sent letters. Her inbox was filled with stories just like hers. A black father handcuffed in front of his children, a young woman arrested for asking too many questions. Camille read every word. Each message added fuel to the fire burning in her chest. This wasn't just personal anymore. It was political. It was generational. It was historical. And yet, through the whirlwind of attention, Camille remained grounded. She wasn't chasing headlines. She was chasing truth, justice, change. Every night as the city outside her windows settled into sleep, Camille stayed awake, drawing battle lines in ink, carving out a path towards something bigger than one courtroom, one badge, or one moment of humiliation. This time, she wouldn't be defending someone else. She'd be defending the principle that no one, not even those in uniform, was above accountability. The momentum behind Camille Johnson's case didn't just simmer, it exploded. What began as a quiet, humiliating afternoon in the park had evolved into a catalyst for something far larger than she ever imagined. The video, shaky, grainy, yet undeniable, captured her composed resistance, the officer's aggression, and the moment metal handcuffs clamped onto her wrists. It swept across the internet like a firestorm, igniting outrage, empathy, and uncomfortable conversations in households and offices far beyond Fort Collins. But Camille didn't seek the spotlight. She turned down interview requests, ignored talk show invitations, and declined podcast features. This wasn't about fame, it was about focus. In her small home office, cluttered with legal briefs and highlighted case law, she was constructing not just a lawsuit, but a mirror. One that would force the police department, the community, and perhaps the entire country to see what it had tried so long to ignore. Still, the outside world refused to be quiet. Messages poured in by the hundreds, emails from people she'd never met, comments from strangers, handwritten letters slipped under her office door. Many started the same way. "I saw your video. I'm so sorry. It happened to me too." Stories of unjust stops, wrongful arrests, verbal abuse, violence, shame. Camille read them all, each one a wound reopened, a truth confirmed. She found herself at town halls, not by obligation, but by necessity. She listened to the voices of her community, teachers, veterans, students, single mothers, all recounting their own brushes with systemic injustice. At a local college, she spoke to a packed auditorium of law students and activists. "The courtroom is not the only battlefield," she told them. "The system does not correct itself. It waits to be challenged." Even as she advocated publicly, the personal toll pressed in quietly. Late at night, as the city's lights flickered in the distance, Camille sat alone, staring at her arrest photo, the one they took under flickering fluorescent bulbs when her voice hadn't mattered. The same photo now sat in a case file, on her own desk. The irony wasn't lost on her. Marissa, her closest friend, stopped by often with food, distraction, or just quiet presence. "You know people are watching you now," she said one evening, placing takeout on the counter. Camille didn't look up. "Good," she answered, scribbling notes on a legal pad. "Then let them see what a fight for justice really looks like." The support from the community was a gift, but also a burden. Camille knew she was carrying more than her own dignity. She was carrying the weight of everyone who never got their day in court. Every time she spoke, every legal document she filed, every public appearance she made. It all had to mean something. Because this wasn't just about holding two officers accountable. It was about making sure the next black woman reading a book in the park wouldn't need to carry a legal degree to defend her right to exist. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Camille had just finished reviewing evidence with her legal team when her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. Her attorney's voice was on the other end, steady, cautious, but laced with something heavier. "Camille," he said, "you should sit down." Her stomach clenched. She expected more delays, maybe a challenge to her lawsuit, another procedural wall. But what he said next stole the breath from her lungs. "You've been assigned as the judge for one of the officer's upcoming misconduct hearings." For a long, stunned second, Camille said nothing. She stared at the wall in front of her, the framed degrees, the shelves of law books that had always been her armor. She had filed a lawsuit to expose the injustice, to hold those officers accountable in a civil court. But now she was being asked to preside over a completely separate internal misconduct case involving the very same men who had dragged her from a park bench and humiliated her in front of a crowd. She leaned back in her chair, heart pounding. Was this fate, irony, or a test of everything she claimed to stand for? Could she sit in judgment of the men who had once judged her unworthy of even reading a book in public? Could she truly be impartial? And then she remembered the look on Carter's face, that smug certainty when he tightened the cuffs, the chill in Daniels' voice when he called her suspicious. She remembered her own reflection in the cruiser window, the sound of the cell door closing behind her, and in that moment, her hesitation crystallized into something sharper, resolve. "This isn't about revenge," she told her attorney quietly. "It's about doing what they couldn't, being fair." The morning of the hearing, the courtroom was quiet but tense. People shuffled into their seats, unaware of the twist that was about to unfold. At the defendant's table sat Officers Carter and Daniels, clad in uniform, bored expressions painted across their faces. Another routine internal hearing, they likely thought. Another slap on the wrist. But when the doors to the judge's chambers opened and Camille Johnson emerged in her black robe, the air shifted like a thunderclap. Carter's face blanched. Daniels visibly tensed. It was her, the woman they had handcuffed, the woman they had dismissed, now presiding with full authority. Camille took her seat with measured calm. "This court is now in session," she declared, her voice clear and unwavering. For a fleeting moment, the power dynamic was reversed. But Camille wasn't here to settle personal scores. She was here to uphold justice, not just for herself, but for everyone watching. And as the hearing began, the officers fidgeted beneath her gaze, no longer in control, no longer confident. The very system they had once used as a weapon was now demanding they answer for their actions. And this time, Camille Johnson was holding the gavel. The courtroom buzzed with a strange electricity the moment Camille Johnson took the bench. Word had spread quickly, too quickly, about who would be presiding over the misconduct hearing involving officers Carter and Daniels. Some in the gallery were there out of routine, others out of curiosity, but for those who knew the backstory, tension hung in the air like a storm cloud. Camille sat tall in her black robe, her expression unreadable, every movement measured. But beneath the surface, her heart pounded, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of what this moment meant. Across the room, Carter and Daniels sat stiffly, their uniforms crisp, their demeanor guarded. Gone were the smug expressions from the park that day. In their place, discomfort, unease, maybe even regret. Camille met their gaze briefly, and in that second, the power they once held over her shattered like glass. The prosecution launched into their opening arguments, laying out a damning case. Excessive force during a routine traffic stop, a young black man tackled without provocation, protocol ignored. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, locking eyes with Camille, "this is not just about one night. This is about a pattern of behavior, unchecked, repeated, and dangerous." Camille nodded slightly, pen gliding silently over her notepad. She took in every word, every inflection, every detail, just as she had done 1,000 times before as an attorney. But today she wasn't defending or prosecuting. She was deciding. And the irony didn't escape her. Those who once judged her without cause were now hoping for her judgment with mercy. The defense tried to push back, their arguments familiar. Split-second decision, officer safety, perceived threat. Camille had heard these phrases too many times in her career. They were shields, designed to deflect accountability. But she listened intently, never letting her personal history cloud her obligation to fairness. Then came the testimony. The young victim, Ethan, took the stand, his voice trembling. "I wasn't doing anything wrong," he said. "They didn't even ask me a question before I was on the ground." His eyes flicked to the officers, then to Camille. "I thought I was going to die." Camille felt her chest tighten. She saw herself in Ethan's fear, in the helplessness of being treated as guilty without cause. She steadied herself. This was not the time to feel, it was the time to weigh truth against excuses. When Carter was called to testify, his confidence cracked. Under the scrutiny of the court and Camille's unwavering gaze, his answers faltered. "Looking back," he said, voice low, I should have handled it differently." Daniels was no better. His justifications rang hollow, rehearsed. Camille watched them both carefully, not with vengeance, but with clarity. She wasn't looking for apologies. She was searching for accountability. As the session adjourned for the day, the courtroom emptied slowly, murmurs trailing behind. Camille remained at the bench, hands folded. She had witnessed countless trials, but never one like this. The truth was unfolding, piece by painful piece, and this time justice wasn't a distant ideal. It was standing in that room, in black robes, with a nameplate that read, "Judge Camille Johnson." The day of reckoning had come. The courtroom was filled to capacity. Reporters lined the back wall. Community members packed the pews, and a hush of expectation hung over every seat. Camille Johnson stepped into the room with the quiet authority of someone who had walked through fire and come out stronger. She wore the black robe not just as a symbol of justice, but as armor forged from every moment of humiliation, every hour spent building a case, and every sleepless night reliving the sting of steel cuffs on her wrists. Today, she would deliver the ruling. As she took her seat on the bench, the room fell silent. Across from her sat Officers Carter and Daniels, no longer the smug enforcers from the park, but subdued men in uniform, their shoulders heavy, their faces pale. They had heard the testimony. They had watched the video played back in open court. And now they waited for the one voice that would determine what came next, the same voice they once tried to silence. Camille's gaze swept across the courtroom before settling on the two men before her. Then, with a steady breath, she began. The role of law enforcement is to protect and serve the community, she said, her voice firm yet controlled, with integrity, with respect, with fairness. When those entrusted with this responsibility abuse their power, they erode public trust and inflict harm that extends far beyond a single incident. Every word echoed through the courtroom like a drumbeat. Carter shifted in his seat. Daniels looked down at the table, jaw clenched. The reality of what they had done, and who now held them accountable, was undeniable. Camille continued, laying out the evidence that had been presented during the hearing, the excessive use of force, the violation of protocol, and the pattern of behavior that could no longer be dismissed as isolated. The court finds, she said, pausing deliberately, that Officers Carter and Daniels acted with unnecessary and unjustified force in violation of both their training and the trust of this community. A ripple of emotion passed through the room. Some gasped, others whispered. But Camille didn't waver. She outlined the consequences clearly, a formal disciplinary record that would follow them, mandatory suspension without pay, and required participation in intensive retraining programs focused on de-escalation, racial bias, and community accountability. Her voice remained composed, but her message was thunderous. Justice wasn't about destroying lives. It was about rebuilding a system that had lost its way. As she struck the gavel and declared the court adjourned, Carter slowly rose to his feet. He hesitated, then turned toward her. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "I'm sorry." Camille met his eyes. She didn't smile. She didn't nod. She simply acknowledged him with a measured look, because change didn't begin with apologies. It began with consequences. That night, Camille stood on the courthouse steps beneath a sky streaked with gold. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time something felt different, real. This wasn't just a verdict, it was a statement. Justice could prevail, and now it had a name. The gavel had fallen, the courtroom had emptied, but for Camille Johnson, the real work was only just beginning. That evening, she stood before a packed room at the local community center, no longer just a judge or an attorney, but a symbol of something far more powerful, resilience in the face of injustice. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead as neighbors, activists, students, and elders filled every available chair, their eyes fixed on her with a mixture of gratitude and hope. The verdict she had delivered earlier that day against Officers Carter and Daniels had rippled through the city like a shockwave. But Camille knew, verdicts alone don't change systems. People do. As she walked among the crowd, hands reached out to her. A young mother with a toddler on her hip whispered, "Thank you for standing up." An older man in a worn veteran's jacket took her hand and held it tightly, eyes shining. And then came an elderly woman, small in stature but firm in presence, who gripped Camille's fingers and said, her voice trembling, "What you did in that courtroom, it means the world to us." Camille smiled, not from pride but from understanding. "This is just the beginning," she said gently. Over the following week, Camille made it her mission to keep the momentum alive. She organized roundtable discussions between local law enforcement and community leaders. She pushed for policy reviews, calling for mandatory body cameras, independent oversight boards, and anti-bias training rooted in lived experience, not just procedure. Her courtroom ruling had sparked something no one could ignore, a wave of conversation, accountability, and most importantly, action. But she never lost sight of what had started it all. One quiet afternoon in the park, a book in her lap, two officers who couldn't see past the color of her skin. That memory never faded. It fueled her every step. One day, as she left a town hall meeting, she passed by a group of high school students gathered on the courthouse steps, holding handmade signs that read, "Justice is watching and change starts here." One of the students, barely 16, called out to her, "Miss Johnson, we learned about you in civics class today. You're why I want to study law." Camille paused, moved beyond words. For all the pain, the humiliation, the rage that once threatened to consume her, this was the answer. This was the purpose. She hadn't just survived the system, she had shaken it from within. And though the road ahead was long, filled with resistance and hard-won battles, she walked it with the quiet conviction of someone who had reclaimed their voice and turned it into a force that could no longer be ignored. Because true justice wasn't just about verdicts, it was about transformation, and Camille Johnson was just getting started. The story of Camille Johnson offers a powerful reminder. Dignity and justice are not gifts. They are rights that must be protected, even when the system fails us. For older adults who have witnessed decades of change, it reaffirms a truth long understood. Silence never leads to progress, but courage in the face of injustice does. Camille's experience shows that standing up for what is right, even when you are humiliated or dismissed, can become a spark for transformation. Her story is not just about personal vindication. It's about using wisdom, experience, and community support to challenge what's broken and help build something better. No matter our age, we all have a role to play, whether through speaking out, supporting those who fight for equity, or sharing our own stories. We can continue to shape a fairer world. Camille didn't let her age, status, or fear stop her. She reminded us that it's never too late to demand respect, and that justice, once awakened, can inspire generations.